The wind howled low and mean across the dry plains as the sun dipped behind the jagged hills, casting the widow Callahan's ranch in shadows long enough to swallow a man whole. And in that fading light the house stood like a fortress, tall, weather-beaten, and silent save for the creak of the old barn doors shifting in the breeze. Word traveled fast in those parts, and every saloon from Red Mesa to Bitter Creek whispered about the giant widow who lived out there alone, tall enough to meet a man's eyes without tilting her head, broad-shouldered from years of roping cattle and splitting fence posts, and feared enough that even desperate drifters thought twice before taking work from her. They said she'd had 7 ranch hands in the last 3 years, each one found dead before the season turned, some trampled in stampedes, some shot in so-called accidents, some never found at all, their names vanishing like water in desert sand. And when the trail brought Jack Brogan, a hard-bitten gun hand with nothing but a half-dead horse and a hunger for coin, to her front gate, he was greeted not by an offer but by a warning. "Every man who enters my ranch dies," she said, her voice low and even as she leaned on the corral fence, eyes the color of cold steel fixed on him. "Still want the job." Most men would have spat, tipped their hat, and ridden on, but Jack wasn't most men. There was something about her stance, the way she didn't flinch under his stare, the quiet challenge in her words that told him she wasn't bluffing, and maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the part of him that had been looking for a place to stop running, but he said, "Lady, I've been half dead since the war. Might as well finish the job somewhere that pays." She studied him a moment longer, then turned toward the barn, tossing back a simple, "Saddle up." Then, as if he'd already signed his fate, the first days were like working on any hard-bitten spread, mending fences, branding calves, driving cattle across dry creek beds. But there was a tension under the skin of the place, a watchfulness in the way she scanned the hills at dusk, rifle leaning close at hand no matter where she stood. Jack noticed the bullet holes in the north fence posts, the way the stock sometimes spooked at nothing, the fresh graves out past the cottonwoods with no markers but simple wooden crosses, 7 of them, weathered and leaning. And one night by the fire, as coyotes sang in the distance, he asked her straight, what really happened to the others? She didn't answer right away, just stared into the flames like they were telling her a story, then finally said, "This land was my husband's dream, and he died keeping it. Men have been trying to take it ever since, ranchers, outlaws, even a banker who sent hired guns dressed as ranch hands. I don't bury anyone who doesn't come here with bad intentions, but they all come here with bad intentions." Jack didn't push, though something in her tone told him she believed every word, and when trouble came, it came fast. A dust cloud on the horizon, the thunder of hooves, and a gang of 5 riders barreling toward the yard with rifles high. Without a word, the widow was at the barn, tossing him a Winchester and taking up position by the porch, and the fight was over before the dust settled. 3 of the men dead in the yard, the other 2 galloping back the way they'd come, one clutching his shoulder. Jack looked at her in the quiet after, breathing hard, and realized this wasn't some curse killing her ranch hands. This was a war, and she was its only general. Over the weeks that followed, the attacks came in waves. A poisoned well one night, a barn fire another, ambushes out on the range, and every time, they stood side by side, rifle barrels smoking, eyes locked not on each other but on the horizon where the next threat would come. Jack stopped thinking about pay and started thinking about survival, and somewhere in the long nights of guarding the cattle under cold starlight, he started thinking about her in ways that had nothing to do with danger. She carried herself like she needed no one, but he saw the moments when the weight of it all pressed her shoulders low, the flicker in her eyes when she passed her husband's grave, The way she lingered a little too long when she handed him coffee in the morning. The final test came one black dawn when the biggest push yet hit them. 12 men on horseback, rifles and shotguns, firing into the yard like they meant to burn the whole place down with lead. The fight was chaos, splintering wood, screaming horses, the air thick with smoke and grit, and by the time it was over, Jack was bleeding from a graze on his ribs, the widow had a torn sleeve and a fresh scar across her temple, and the yard was littered with bodies that would never ride again. They buried them far from the house, not out of mercy but so the vultures wouldn't come too close, and as they stood over the last mound of dirt, Jack said, "You were right. Every man who comes here dies." She looked at him, a tired smile pulling at the corner of her mouth, and said, "Not you. Not if you're smart enough to stay," and in that moment, he knew he would, not because it was safe, but because it was hers, and because the only curse on this ranch was the one she put on the men who came to take it. So if you've got the grit for stories of blood, dust, and the kind of love that's forged in gun smoke and fire, hit that subscribe button now, because out here in the Wild West, some legends are still being written, and you won't want to miss a single one.